Welcome to the JFK assassination talks. We're coming from Dallas, Texas, and I hope you enjoy this. Basically, we're going to talk about the JFK assassination, and we're going to try to clear up some things that confuse a lot of people. Apparently, confuses a lot of educated people that actually have shows on Discovery Channel, History Channel, and PBS, and all this, and even people that were part of the Warren Commission. I don't really understand how this got to where it is, but basically we talk about the magic bullet, single bullet theory, and I'm going to show you why it's bogus and why we even talk about it is beyond me, because it didn't happen, and I'll tell you why. The actual truth of it all is actually in plain sight, and nobody has taken the time. The government basically, it's basically a coup d'etat. They overthrew our own government, killed our president 53.5 years ago, used the media, and still do to this day, to confuse and this whole thing and hide the fact. When people know, I mean, so much has came out in 53.5 years that we now know. You know, it's not, I mean, do we know every little detail? No, because they destroyed it. If not, they didn't destroy it, they destroyed the people that knew. Either by killing them or making them look crazy. So that's how it goes. Alright, let's get on this magic bullet bullcrap. The truth is actually in a couple of the three different things. It's in the autopsy notes, it's in the mortician's notes, and it's in the notes of FBI agent Sieber and O'Neill. That's where the truth lies. At least with the back wound. The one thing, Commander Humes was probably the pathologist in charge, along with another pathologist, Boswell, and another Army pathologist, the guy that's probably the most knowledgeable of the three that had the most experience dealing with gunshot wound autopsies, was Pierre Fink. Problem was, Pierre Fink showed up an hour late to the autopsy, and when he did get there, he started sticking his nose in everything, seeing what was going on, and some Army general kept pulling him off the side, asking him stupid, dumb-ass questions, keeping him occupied and out of the way. So Pierre even testifies to this. So he basically was frustrated. You know, he kept getting pulled away and didn't really get to see what was going on. He was an hour late, so he was basically insignificant. So two guys that didn't really have hardly any experience with gunshot wounds or doing the autopsy. Now, Commander Humes talks about, prior to the autopsy, this was in Siebert and O'Neill's FBI notes, that it appeared that surgery had been taking place before the autopsy. Okay, well, it's one of two things. He's actually making a correct observation, and they did the surgery and tried to obliterate and hide evidence of frontal shots, one to the throat and one to the head, because they're patsing their shooters going to be back behind in the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. So they had to alter some wounds. Now, we do now know that actually there was a body switch, or a casket switch actually. The president was put by Aubrey Reich and a few other attendants from the funeral home, put the president in a bronze ceremonial casket. When he gets to Bethesda for the autopsy, he's in an aluminum shipping casket like they ship the dead from Vietnam in. Well, somewhere it got switched. The other odd thing about it is the actual body arrived approximately 30 minutes before it was actually arriving with Jackie and the Secret Service and the other entourage. So in other words, they were hauling an empty casket. The switch had already been made. So the surgery, Humes is either covering himself for him actually doing it, which I don't think he did. I don't think 30 minutes he's going to be able to do all he had. Now, a 3-hour flight from Dallas to Bethesda or Washington, yeah, I think it. You know, if somebody's stowed away, it could be in there with a flashlight and some surgical equipment doing the work. And from what I've seen in the autopsy photos, basically looks like what happened. Because actually what happened was the president was hit in the throat with a frontal shot. Dr. Malcolm Perry from Parkland called it a wound of entrance. He actually took that bullet hole and he made an incision across it and placed a tube so the president could breathe. They call that process a tracheotomy. He did a tracheotomy, or ostomy, whatever you want to call it. Made one little incision, put the tube in the trachea there. That's it. When you see in the autopsy photos, this wound's about this long now and about this wide. Somebody had taken and obliterated it so it disguises the entry wound. What the government wants you to believe is Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the school book depository. First shot hit the president in the back, exited out his throat, went into Connolly right below his armpit right here, broke a bunch of ribs, punctured a lung, came out below his right nipple, went into his right wrist, breaking his radius bone, severing the radial tendon, and then it ended up in his left thigh where it wormed its way out and fell out on a stretcher and was found by an orderly at Parkland. And basically come out all intact. Well, that was not the case, and it's actually the reason why I say that is because in Hume's notes, well, actually the FBI agent's notes of what Humes was saying during the autopsy was on the back one. He said it's basically 6 millimeters in diameter, and it's a wound of entrance into the back, and he stuck his pinky in the wound itself, and he could feel the projectile. So he makes this statement that the projectile has an exit. He can feel it with his finger. Some Army general, who I think is Curtis LeMay, tells him don't probe any further and to move on. Well, if you look at the autopsy photos, this is my little sad drawing of this. But basically, here's the 3rd thoracic vertebrae. Humes correctly puts it in the right position. He says it's at T3 and it's right of the midline. Midline is where your spine is, so it's just right at the midline. So in other words, it's 5 to 6 inches from the collar. But you'll see another wound that's kind of obtuse looking and jagged right above that and to the right of it. What I suggest is that's the exit for the throat wound, but it didn't exit the clothing. It actually, the clothing trapped it and it did not exit, because you found one hole that matches up with the entry wound to T3. We know that T3 wound is the wound of entrance because it has an abrasion collar around it. It looks like a whelp, and it's perfectly round. So we know that, and we also know from Sieber and O'Neill notes that it didn't exit, so there's no way in hell it came out of his throat then if the projectile's still in there. Another thing to confirm that is the trajectory is 21 degrees downward slope. So if it had hit Kennedy at T3, it would probably came out his abdomen. So the trajectory is wrong for that to happen as well. But Dale Myers, the History Channel, Discovery Channel, PBS, they all want to preach this stuff, and Dale Myers will make these animated cartoons, computer generated, and here's the trajectory. First thing he does is he shows that the throat wound exiting below the knot of the tie. We know that didn't happen because actually the entry wound to the throat grazed the top knot of the tie. Top part of the knot. So they move stuff around to make it work. But if the pathologist is saying the bullet's still in there, then it could never be a magic bullet to begin with. The whole theory is just shot in the head right there. No pun intended. Okay. The other thing is we commonly react, and people take that as he's shot at the same time as Kennedy. If you listen to Connolly talk, he basically says this. He heard a round. He said he turned to his right. Couldn't really see the president, but he was in the process of turning back to his left when he was hit. You don't really remember anything else. The problem is he was hit by 2 separate rounds. He was hit in the back. He was still holding his Stetson between his index finger and his thumb. So what I suggest is a shot came in to his right wrist, breaking the bone, severing the tendon, and coming out right into his thigh. So we know that basically, with that being said, that there were 2 separate wounds. Rounds did the damage to Conley. Kennedy had 2 separate rounds, one to the throat, one to the back. We haven't got to the head part yet. We'll get on that in just a second. So, so we know basically from the notes from the autopsy that the wound didn't exit in the back. Conley, his reaction is actually from a bullet coming through the windshield, coming right by his ear, and hitting Kennedy in the throat. When that wound actually came, or that bullet came through the windshield, it brought some glass particles with it. Mortician notes says there were some glass fragments in the president's face, and it had these tiny little holes that he had to patch, because when he embalmed them, they were leaking, so he had to take mortician wax and pack his face. So several witnesses at Parkland Hospital seen the windshield of the car and seen a bullet hole in the windshield. So that confirms that. Alright, where's that shooter going to be located? Well, another drawing here. He's proceeding up Elm. It curves. There's a triple overpass and a railroad bridge over it. This bridge has a winged out section at each corner, and it has concrete slats in it. So as a shooter, you're going to need 3 things. You're going to need elevation and a clear line of sight, and you're going to need concealment, and you're going to need an escape route. That place offers all of that, and it offers the right, correct trajectory. What you need to realize, when the actual first shot was fired to hit Kennedy in the throat, the shooter on the railroad bridge, didn't have clearance from the windshield because the car's up the hill. So he went through the windshield and hit him in the throat. But as the car proceeds down and curves, the road has a 6-degree downward slope. So what actually happens is the closer he progresses along and slopes downward, the shooter now gets clearance for the headshot above the windshield. And so with Kennedy turning his head like this and the car angled that way, that's where the shot came from, the trajectory. Sherry Feaster, she just passed away a month or so ago, maybe a month ago. She wrote a book on it. She's a forensic pathologist, and basically that's where she says it came from. I actually was on this bridge one day with a friend. I could get in a prone shooting position. He could be standing in the middle of the bridge and he couldn't see me at all. So what I suggest is they had a 3-person team. You had a shooter, a spotter, and a cover guy, which basically held Secret Service credentials and a weapon. So anybody came up on him, he could throw the badge on him and the gun while the shooters escaped. Also, there's a parking lot just to the right of this location. The shooters basically break down their gun back behind the railroad bridge and throw it in the toolbox, stand up, and walk right out of there. Go to the parking lot, get in the car, and drive off, or they could actually went across the railroad tracks down the slope, and it was deflated to any witnesses or anything. Nobody'd see them. They could walk their way out of there. So the throat shot and the head shot I know a lot of people believe the grass, there very well could have been a shooter there. I mean, a lot of people believe that. I've used to believe it. He could have been hit with 2 to 3 rounds in the head from various locations. But I believe the actual headshot came from the southeast corner of the railroad bridge. That's where it all points to. I believe the throat shot came there. And I think they don't even discuss that wound that you see in the photos, and I think they just ignore it. Like it's a dried blood or something on him. And it's not a wound, but it's a wound. President Ford, Gerald Ford, was on the Warren Commission, and he actually all of a sudden started calling it the back wound and neck wound. And they've done everything they could to confuse the situation, and they still do. Even guys that research this, for some reason, can't get through their head if by looking at the notes it says that if the back wound of entry did not exit and he could feel the projectile, there's no way it came out his throat. So it's a moot point. So why do they keep trying to follow our inspector's dumbass routine that he tried to because what they basically did was they basically, instead of investigating and let the facts of the case determine and the evidence determine what it was, they had a preconceived idea of who did it, where he did it, and what happened, and then they're going to make the evidence fit that story. That's what's wrong with this whole thing. The JFK is the case is complicated because of a couple of things. It's basically what I call the foxes guarding the hen house, murdering the hens in the hen house, and then blaming a lone coyote that they kill, and then they stuff before he can defend himself, and stuff all the feathers around him. And then if that is not enough, they're going to investigate the whole case and then give the report to the farmer and his wife about what happened to their hens in the hen house. That's what the JFK assassination is in a nutshell. That's what happened. It was a coup that was set up and perpetrated by elements of our government, elements of our CIA, and the mob, and all these people in the military-industrial complex, and it was financed by oil men in Texas. LBJ was fixing to go to prison. Him and the Secretary of the Senate, Bobby Baker, and along with Billy Saul Estes, they were in a cotton commodity scam, and they were into a lot of things, and they were being investigated at the time of the assassination. But as soon as Kennedy was killed and LBJ became president, it was gone. Never heard anything about it. I can tell you this: if Dr. Errol Rose at Parkland would have done the autopsy instead of the body being shipped to Bethesda, where it's under military control, we wouldn't be here today discussing what the hell happened, because Dr. Rose would have told you what had happened. But instead, the body was stolen by the Secret Service. Basically, Earl Rose told him it was Texas law at that time. The autopsy had to be done right there. The body is the main piece of evidence. It had, and Roy Kellerman basically brandishes his weapon and says, "We'll run you over with this body if you don't get out of the way," because he's going back to Washington. Now, the thing I find really funny and kind of ironic about the whole thing is the damn Secret Service were more interested in protecting the dead JFK than they were when he was alive. It's pretty sad, isn't it? Anyways, that basically is it in a nutshell, But don't take my word for it. Just take a look at all these things. Look at the mortician notes, the autopsy notes, and definitely look at the notes of Siebert and O'Neill. And then look at the angle from the schoolbook depository. And look at the fact that Oswald supposedly shot a $12 rifle, vintage World War II Italian Carcano, that basically was called the humanitarian rifle for never having actually killed anybody because it was such a piece of shit. So take a look at that, and we'll be back for another round. And leave your comments. I'd like to hear what you had to think on it. Anyways, have a good evening.